been supplying, or rather getting Mr. Docra to look after birds, because the RSPB is not a welfare organisation. We don't have any expertise in the care of sick and injured birds, and consequently, any birds any calls that we have about sick or injured birds, we refer them to what are known as licensed rehabilitation keepers, people that have a licence by the government to look after them. But just because of that, we can't just turn a blind eye on what were apparently infringements of the law, unfortunate as it may be.
4 days after the search, Mr. Docra almost died from an internal hemorrhage.
As you said, Mr. Docra had a distinguished record in looking after injured birds. He's well known throughout the area and indeed throughout the country. Was that the right tactic to pursue with a man in his 70s who almost died shortly after the search?
I didn't know anything about the latter. If I could just explain a little bit of the background. The RSPB and police were carrying out an inquiry into a taxidermist in Norfolk. During the course of that inquiry, we found a number of dead birds. Many of those birds had been shot or pole-trapped. Legal ways of killing birds. The main supplier to that taxidermist, who was subsequently successfully prosecuted, was Mr. Docra. No matter what the background of Mr. Docra was, what he'd been in the past as a conservationist, we felt it only right that we should carry out an inquiry.
Doesn't compassion play some part in this, though? Here is a man in his 70s with a long and distinguished record. Surely that should weigh also in the RSPB's mind. Isn't he entitled to consideration just as much as a bird is?
Absolutely. But who's saying that the RSPB didn't show that? Just because a search warrant was obtained, the RSPB went with the police and asked him questions and was satisfied with most of the answers, although we did have to give him a warning. Isn't that being fair?
Some RSPB members felt the treatment of Mr. Docra was far from fair. His next-door neighbour resigned from the society.
How many times have people come up to my house looking for his house with an injured bird? Even vets have come with them, and it's been wonderful work what he has done. It shocked me that a society as famous as that couldn't have made some investigations before he took out a police search warrant. Because a police search warrant is something not at all you'd like to receive.
If he technically transgressed the law, so what? We all transgress the law virtually every day of our lives on the roads, and so I think they were heavy-handed. They lacked common sense, sympathy and compassion, and they haven't even apologised to the poor old boy. An absolute disgrace.
Mr. Docra admits giving dead birds to a taxidermist. He received no payment and only did so after checking with the Department of the Environment that it was permissible. Now the cage in which people used to leave injured birds and the aviaries in which they were nursed back to health all lie empty. If you want to look after injured birds, you have to buy a licence from the government, and Jack Docra has given his up. Already he's had to turn away 50 requests for help.
I think that's a shame, because we've made it absolutely quite clear to Mr. Docra in letters that there's no need for him to do that. If he really does feel for wildlife and he wants to look after sick and injured birds, why has he stopped? Why isn't he continuing? Seems to be cutting off his nose to spite his face.
But can you understand him not wanting to continue? Perhaps he doesn't want the danger of having his house searched again.
I think that would be extremely unlikely. If Mr. Docra made sure that he had all his paperwork in order, there would be absolutely no question of anybody going round and trying to catch him again. We're not out to catch people. I think this is one important point. The RSPB's only motive is to protect and conserve birds in Britain.
Falconry is a legal pursuit in Britain, but many of its devotees believe the RSPB would actually like to see it stopped. One reason for their concern is a pamphlet by Peter Robinson, formerly the RSPB's Senior Investigations Officer, calling for tighter restrictions on the sport. While still at the Society, Mr. Robinson said there was a network of semi-organised crime within falconry.
We're totally neutral on falconry. Under our Royal Charter, we can take no part in the question of the killing of game birds and legitimate sport of that character, and falconry is a legitimate sport of that character. Where we are concerned, though, is where falcons are taken from the wild illegally.
An elaborate system of registration is supposed to prevent that happening. There are more than 60 species of bird that have to wear a closed ring if they're kept in captivity. Each ring has a unique number. They're fitted when the bird is a few days old and then cannot be removed. This is intended as an infallible means of identification, so that bird keepers can prove their innocence if they're accused of taking a bird from the wild.
He went out to work one day and left his bird quite happily at home. And when he came home, it had been taken away, put in a box and off to the Highlands, and that was the last he ever saw or heard of it.
As a boy in the Lake District, Sam Garside was obsessed by birds. He'd nursed injured birds until they were well enough to be released.
I was an interested falconer really from a very early age. I was sort of been enthusiastic, very attracted by them. For a reason I don't know why.
Sam had a history of psychological problems and was eventually diagnosed as schizophrenic.
When Sammy was finding life very, very difficult during his teenage years, he had this one fixation on birds and birds of prey, and he begged for us to allow him to have a lugger falcon, or a falcon of some kind. And we thought perhaps it was a good incentive for him to save his money up, because they were expensive at that time. The price was £400. He worked extremely hard over a long period of time and saved up to get this £400.
The lugger falcon that Sam bought was his pride and joy. One day, the RSPB came to question him about a peregrine that was allegedly in his possession. They didn't find a peregrine, but they confiscated his lugger falcon. The reason was a discrepancy in the paperwork. Sam's bird had a closed ring with a 6-digit number. He also had a receipt saying where it had been bought. But the last digit on the ring, which denoted its size, was different from the last digit on the receipt. And there was another problem. The Wildlife and Countryside Act introduced new requirements for the ringing of birds. Because Sam had bought his bird before it came into force, when he tried to register it, he was also asked to fit a numbered cable tie. Sam lost the cable tie, but still signed a declaration saying that he'd fitted it.
I just couldn't believe that this was happening, and I thought there was obviously some very, very big mistake. I thought this man had taken the bird away, that was not a peregrine, didn't know the difference. And I just thought I had to contact him and have the bird returned.
When the case came to court, Sam was fined £250. His bird was confiscated, and he was banned from keeping birds for 5 years. His family approached the local MP, who was at that time in the cabinet as Minister of Agriculture.
It seemed to me really very tough that a boy who I thought was totally devoted to this bird, totally devoted to birds in general, had been treated in a way by the Royal Society of Protection for Birds that I thought was arrogant, bullying and high-handed.
When I reviewed the facts of the matter, I felt that there was a sufficiently strong case to answer, that there may have been fiddling going on, which wasn't just straightforward ignorance, and indeed, of course, Mr. Garside pleaded guilty.
The family appealed against sentence, and Sam's fine was quashed, but the confiscation and the bird-keeping ban stood. Sam has never had another bird. His defenders argue that he was guilty of nothing more than the small technical offence of failing to fill in a couple of forms properly, through a genuine misunderstanding.
If he wasn't able to understand that, he, I know, had several falconer friends who could have helped him on that. I won't say I don't believe him, because that would be too strong a thing to say, but he would say this, wouldn't he? And I think that the RSPB does have an educational role to play, which is why we're constantly giving out advice to people on what registration means, what it means to be in possession of an egg collection, and how you could, in fact, fall foul of the law, and a whole range of subjects like this. We're not in the prosecution business. We're in the business of protecting and conserving wild birds. But to get to that end, every now and again, you have to take cases to show that the law has teeth, because that way you will ensure that the majority of birds, and not just the odd one or two, are truly protected by the wildlife legislation in Britain.
So every so often you have to make an example of someone?
I won't put it as strongly as that.